Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joshua Habersky, along with my colleague Glenn Loop from the Premium Cigar Association. We're doing an advocacy training today that's principally for consumers. This is a great resource for anyone that's a retailer to share with your customers, share even with your employees. We are going to be doing another one next week that will be specifically tailored towards retailers and their employees. But this is kind of the Grassroots 101 training to provide the foundation for those folks that have not interacted with elected officials or regulators in the past. Some basic tips. I also want to call attention to everybody that's watching our cigaraction.org website. That is our consumer clearinghouse for all information related to advocacy and government affairs. In the policy resources section, you'll notice a new tab, Grassroots 101, at the bottom of that page. If you click on that, there's a 5-page document that kind of gives you a rundown of everything that Glenn and I are going over in the presentation today. This is meant, we are doing it live in case folks want to tune in. But again, our core audience for this is consumers. And the intended purpose is to have for folks watch this within a condensed amount of time of about a half hour as a recording. So we will be sending this out as a recording. If you are a retailer, feel free to share this link, which will be on our social media as well as our website, with your customers. So in this advocacy training, we're going to prepare you to take part in the frontline fight for your premium cigar rights. We will cover tips, tactics, technology, and tools to ensure that you have the resources you need to protect yourself and premium tobacconists across the country, or your passion for cigars. So what is, and I'm going to go back and forth between federal and state and provide some different examples, but what is PCA advocacy? Really, the core of this is getting our grassroots, getting those customers, getting the many cigar clubs that are connected to brick and mortar retail, lounges, really involved in the public policy process. So on the state level, what is PCA State Advocacy? It's working with a state legislator or regulator who's considering policy initiatives affecting the premium cigar industry. You can say the same thing about the federal level. Advocacy is a combination of professional staff and grassroots and grass tops. And what do I mean by grassroots and grass tops? Grassroots is your average customer. It's the person that comes into your shop once a month. Your grass tops might be a CEO of a chamber of commerce, or a person that's connected within the community that just happens to be a cigar enthusiast, or someone that's in a related secondary or tertiary business. PCA advocacy is the crux of this, and the core of it is coordination with state affiliates and state partners. Glenn, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that before I go to this next slide.
No, we'll get into the specifics of state engagement and local engagement as our program goes on.
Sounds great. So, continuing that PCA state advocacy, a lot of what Glenn and I do, and Ryan on our team, we have legislative tracking that we're constantly doing every day. So an influx of bills are going through a portal. We are individually sifting through those, looking for the ones that are most relevant to the premium cigar and specifically the business of retailing side. If something is a cause for concern or a cause for action, we will highlight that and we will draft correspondence accordingly. That might come in the form of driving engagement on these issues affecting premium cigars through a grassroots action alert. On that cigaraction.org website, you will see a federal and state tab. In there, you will see the litany of grassroots actions that we have put together on issues that we have deemed relevant towards the interests of the Premium Cigar Association and our members. So you'll go on there, and within 1 minute, you can go and enter your information and send out a letter that is pre-drafted by one of our staff members, myself, Glenn, or Ryan, and it will go to your elected officials. On the back end, we are targeting, if it's specifically, let's say, the Energy and Commerce Committee or the Ways and Means Committee or the Tax Committee, we are segmenting that. And your address, when you enter that, it will go to the appropriate staff. So if you are at the federal level, it will go to your House member. It will go to your 2 senators if it is something being considered by both the House and Senate. We will tailor that and code that to the intended elected officials. Furthermore, on our side, occasionally we will submit support letters, different areas to garner support from the elected officials. We might send a letter of endorsement for a bill to a state legislature that they can use in order to get other support from their colleagues. We might post it online to gain public engagement for something like that. And it's always helpful to have grassroots signatories and constituents taking part. Then Glenn or myself can go to that state legislature and say, hey, here's our letter of endorsement as the Premium Cigar Association representing the industry. Oh, also, we've had 100 constituents, customers, and let's say 10 brick and mortar retailers sign on to this letter. And that is all the more impactful. We're trying to build coalitions and a variety of different interests within our industry to support or defeat different legislation. We're also working to go up the ladders of engagement. So, for instance, if you are a consumer and you see something of interest on the Premium Cigar Association website or social media and you retweet it or you post it on Facebook, that is the bare minimum of engagement. You're starting up that ladder of engagement. We are going to work to create trainings, information sessions, ones like this, so that you not only share this on your social media, you are taking action, you are signing petitions. You may even want to engage and meet with your elected official virtually. Glenn, myself, Ryan, Patrick Anderson on our team, we're happy to facilitate those conversations and connect you with your elected officials. If you don't know who your state rep is or your state senator or even your federal member of Congress or senator, we are happy to connect you with the appropriate staff. And that goes for consumers, employees, retailers, and our manufacturer partners. So we're also trying to build levels of interest. If you've noticed over the past few years, we've been creating new resources. We've been creating model legislation guides, things to make it easier for those conversations that you will have with elected officials. So over the past year, Glenn and myself and our team has been working to create kind of those frequently asked questions. So when a customer or consumer advocate comes to the PCA and says, hey, I want to meet with my elected official, we already have a general idea and outline of how to prepare people for that. We have health studies, we have economic impact studies that we can provide consumers with so that they are armed and ready to go with the information for whatever meeting at any level of government, local, state, federal. And we also will assist you, and this is where, if you are new to this, this is something that you haven't done in the past, and we have, several retailers and several consumers that meet every year with elected officials. They have participated in our fly-ins in the past, and they're seasoned veterans with this. Sometimes we will even connect you with one of them so that they can tell you how some best practices as a direct constituent, something that staff such as Glenn and I, we don't have that same angle, and they might make you feel a little bit more comfortable. It is intimidating to meet with an elected official the first time. Many moons ago, Glenn and I had our first meeting with elected officials in the marble halls of the Virginia State Capitol or the marble halls of the U.S. Congress, and there were butterflies in your stomach, and that's normal. But we want to work with you to put you at ease, especially if you are a first-time consumer that wants to be passionate about the premium cigar industry and wants to come in there and talk about the positive benefits, the economic benefits, and the ways that it has had a positive impact on your life. So Glenn and I and our team will help you, along with our retail partners, craft your story to be the most impactful, depending on the level of government where you're presenting. Glenn, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, I mean, now's the time to really drill down and get into the specifics of grassroots engagement. I've said for over a dozen years, our mission is really to build up the cigar patron community, the cigar smoker community, into a bona fide political constituency. I remember several years ago, I was giving a speech to a group, and I said, the estimates are there's right around 3 million cigar consumers in America. And that's from the person who has a cigar at the wedding or graduation to the person that has one or two a week. And there's not, as you well know, Josh, there's not a special interest group in America that wouldn't give their right arm for 3 million constituents. And elections matter, and political constituencies matter. And I've watched it happen. Individuals can make a true difference in our political arena to protect this simple passion for enjoying premium handmade cigars. So, what I want to do now is really share some tangible strategies that the consumer community can engage with to make their voices heard on good legislation and bad. I mean, there's some good legislation out there this year. Tax caps that'll save cigar consumers money in New York, cigar bar bills in New York. There's cigar lounge legislation in city halls and state capitals throughout the country, which means the message is getting across about how we are different. We're different than other tobacco products. We're different than other pieces of legislation involving tobacco. We're a lifestyle bill. We're a small business bill. And that's the way we have to position these things. So what I want to do is just rattle off some individual strategies. And if consumers or retailers that are listening to this message want to follow up accordingly, we can flesh out these strategies to use to influence the political process for the premium cigar community. One is to engage in email campaigns. When PCA releases on cigaraction.org a petition, it's serious. And it's an opportunity for you to have your voice heard in the political arena. We make it simple. Your name, your zip code. It goes off to your specific elected officials after that juncture. So make sure you engage in that and contact us on legislation for individual email contact points for your members of the legislature so that you can send a personalized message to them on, again, good and bad legislation. Engage in calling campaigns. Get your cigar clubs together. Get your cigar lounges together. If you look on social media platforms across the board, there are hundreds upon hundreds of cigar lounges and individual patron cigar clubs that can help influence the course of legislation. Visit your local legislator's office, their local office and their capital office. Build a specific relationship. And I mean this as a consumer as well as the retail community, making sure you're making that personal connection so that they recognize you as, my proverbial phrase, you're no longer a cigar smoker, you're a cigar voter. And making sure your elected officials recognize you as a sincere cigar voter that is engaged on the political issues to protect this industry. So make those office visits as a group or individually. Also, organize a cigar town hall. Work with your local retailer to invite your legislators, whether it's a city councilman, a state legislator, or a member of Congress. And we've had every step of the way, local, state, and federal. We've had elected officials in cigar shops throughout the country. They'll come. They'll accept your invitation. And that's the way to help to build us up again as a political constituency.
And Glenn, just to jump in there real quick about the cigar clubs in particular, if you are a cigar club that has a website or social media presence, please take the cigaraction.org link and put it within your website or on your social media so that people can view the information for advocacy there. This will keep you informed and engaged.
And I was going to mention social media in this respect as well. Just making sure you're circulating those petitions that PCA issues. Everybody's got a social media following. Everybody's got a network. And again, you go back to all these hundreds upon hundreds of cigar clubs and lounges across the country. That's what's going to help build up our political constituency message so that it's taken seriously in city halls and state capitals across the country. So there's so many ways for us to engage together, to use these tools that have been provided to us and for you to elevate our political message so that it doesn't get drowned out by the opposition. And we do have opposition. And you can bet that when there's a bill that can help save you a few dollars on your cigars or could regulate where you can enjoy those cigars, you can bet that our opposition is going to be equally as engaged and organized to try to kill that type of legislation or to stop the good legislation. And that's why we have to work together on these types of strategies.
All right, Glenn, I'm going to go to the next slide here. So, what is grassroots advocacy? We've been kind of talking about some of the themes. It's getting your representatives to hear from you directly. The most impactful statements come from you. I like to say that, us in the professional side of government affairs and hired staff, we tee up legislation. We work behind the scenes to make sure that the conditions are there and explain the public policy process. But if something is going to succeed or fail, it is going to be because of that grassroots and grass tops and the statements that are coming from all of you. It's easy to get a meeting if a constituent comes. Most of the meetings that we have been organized, especially last year, the high level meetings when we would meet with a U.S. senator or their staff, we would be bringing in retailers and in some cases customers into the meetings or even the hearings. Glenn, you and I will never forget Delaware, where they had the discussion about reducing the OTP tax in the state, and it was just consumer after consumer from two different shops in the state of Delaware. That should be a pattern that we see in legislation moving forward. Even if it's 3 to 5 customers where there is a major hearing, again, Glenn and I will let folks know if you're signed up on cigaraction.org and there is that sign up tab, or you're already receiving our alerts as a PCA member, you will get information and notice when there's a major hearing. So you can get on the record and provide testimony. We will help you craft that testimony. That is the whole the message that we are talking about. And many of these folks want to hear from you. If you are a consumer or a retailer, you have a vested interest in the community. You have a vested interest in the topic area. And we want to make it, and it will take time, so that you are a go-to resource for elected officials. Where there's a question about tobacco policy, they are coming to you along with the PCA when something pops up. And, hopefully 8-9 times out of 10, it won't involve premium cigars because, we've seen a lot of the legislation as negative or rolling back the rights that we enjoy and have. But for any of the case, we want them to be reaching out to you when there's questions about tobacco policy and small business policy for our retailers, consumers. They want to hear from you of why premium cigars are so important for you. So some myths about advocacy. PCA lobbies for us so we don't have to. That's kind of the general thing. PCA, CRA, CAA, NATO, there's a lot of organizations out there that have hired lobbyists at the state and federal levels. Yes, we are all working on this day in and day out. We have your back. That's why we're working on and sifting through 15,000 pieces of legislation at the state level every year and doing 200 plus congressional meetings at the federal level. But as I said before, we're most effective at teeing up legislation, but we rely on grassroots support from local retailers and consumers to get it across the finish line. This takes numbers, and we need to have multiple contacts from stores and customers to effectively shape public policy. And Glenn, you mentioned it before, there are many folks on the opposition that are working against the efforts of us, and they are mobilizing their grassroots and grass tops. So we need to counteract that in full force. So, I just want to go over this state of play as it relates in this environment. These are challenging times. We have a lot going on, and in some of our previous PCA Live updates, you can find more information on the actual context of where things stand federally and at the state. We're not going to go over that, but it is a hyper competitive environment, whether it's at the state or federal level. We are competing for time and attention of staff and policymakers. There is a anti-tobacco, mindset that is prevailing at all levels of government. This principally relates to cigarettes as well as synthetic nicotine or vapor products, and we have to create those distinction points. But there is that prevailing. Most of the legislation that's being introduced does not help us, and we have to work to defeat that legislation. And I will put a caveat to that. Glenn has done a fantastic job working with our retailers this state legislative session to introduce positive legislation, and we will continue that through the Vision 50 strategic plan. But that anti-tobacco legislation is out there, and thus far, fingers crossed, we have not seen a tax increase at the state level or a flavor bill pass this cycle yet to date. And that was something, on the tax front in 2021, we had no tax increases pass. And we take a lot of pride in that because it's certainly not something that is easy to keep under wraps, and something where your participation is essential to keeping that record. And we're also competing for time and attention with different industries, not just the tobacco and anti-tobacco. We're competing with, healthcare. We're competing with economics. We're competing about trade, foreign policy. They are interest groups. I think there's over 15,000 interest groups in Washington, D.C. alone. And we are competing for that time and attention with all of those different groups. Glenn, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I think it's important, even at the consumer level, to help us frame the message that I think is becoming more successful for the premium cigar community as a whole, the patrons, the retailer, and the manufacturers. And that is, we're not about smoke. We're not about tobacco. We're about small business. We're about Main Street America. We're about jobs, and having legislation that resonates with those themes are going to help separate us from the negative issues that we get swept up in. And that's what we have to stop. We have to stop being swept up in issues that have absolutely nothing to do with the enjoyment, selling, or manufacturing of premium handmade cigars. And by that, you mentioned several of them. Making sure we're not getting swept up in an e-cigarette piece of legislation, making sure we're not getting swept up in a cannabis piece of legislation, making sure we're not getting wrapped up in a cigarette piece of legislation. Our opposition loves, enjoys, and works to group us with things that have nothing to do with the public health impact, which there isn't any, of premium handmade cigars, trying to use tax and regulatory issues to attack us. And I mean us as consumers. And that's why we have to push back in that context and in that theme and with this message that we are not them. I want that said over and over again to the premium cigar community. We are not them. We're about jobs, small business, and Main Street America. I mean, you think about some of the cigar shops in America that are indicative of so many others across the land. L.J. Peretti in Boston, over 147 years old. L.J. Drapers in Washington, D.C., over 125 years old. My local shop in Roanoke, Virginia, is over 100 years old. These are shops that are reflective of shops that are 2 years old, 3 years old, a decade old, that are simply premium community tobacconists selling premium handmade cigars, premium pipe tobacco and accessories, that simply want to be left alone by each level of government. And the more we can do to press that type of a message at all levels of government, the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely. So, in the current state of play, we have, as I mentioned before, vaping and e-cigarettes tend to be, something that is top of mind to elected officials. We still have, COVID-19 and the pandemic. That is definitely something that is of concern with elected officials. Flavors and characterizing flavors. Of course, with the FDA, that's a big one. But at the state and local level, Glenn, you've seen a litany of those introduced. Overly broad, flavor bans. We've been fighting those for many years now. And if you have questions about PCA and our position on characterizing flavors, that is also in the policy resources section of cigaraction.org. But budget shortfalls and tax increases, tax equity, that's something that we really had a lot of last year. And these are some of the topics that might come up in the context of your meeting. If you're going in as a consumer that's concerned about premium cigars, or a retailer, some of the topics listed here, you might get questions from elected officials about that context, or we might be setting up meetings that are related to those. Our team is continuing both federally and at the state level to argue against tax increases and to introduce tax caps in select states to keep the costs of premium cigars where they're at. Some other common ones are prohibitions on distance and restrictions, increases in age. I think that, even after T21 was passed federally, you saw the state legislatures trying to make sure that the state law mirrored the federal law. But sometimes they would go further and add in kind of a grab bag of anti-tobacco provisions into those pieces of legislation, and also look at increasing the age, as in the case of Hawaii and parts of Massachusetts, beyond that level of 21, and New York State as well, and then outright bans on select tobacco products. So that's kind of what we're dealing with in this environment, which is very challenging. Cigaraction.org, and we'll continually reference this as part of our Grassroots toolkit. But in there, as Glenn mentioned, we have the email capabilities, the action alerts, phone calls, social media, legislative updates. You can also look up your legislative officials. As I mentioned, if you're unfamiliar of who they are, enter your address and you will get that information. Also, different legislative events, ways to support the association, as well as key dates on the calendar where we have hearings or testimony that needs to be given, and that ever important sign up form, so that we can grow this grassroots database. Last year we had over 50,000 actions taking place through cigaraction.org, 30,000 on the federal tax increase alone. We need to double and triple those numbers if we are going to be a fighting force at the grassroots level to effectively defend premium cigars and advance premium cigars throughout the policy arena. Here's just an example, a screenshot of that cigaraction.org. In that guide that we put together, you will see more screenshots of where you enter information and how you can go through the step-by-step process. This right here is the top of that cigaraction.org website, where you can see federal and state. I'm your principal point of contact for anything that involves the White House, Congress, or the Food and Drug Administration. And if it involves the states or localities, you will want to reach out to Glenn. Our email addresses are all over cigaraction.org, but mine's simply joshua@premiumcigars.org. Glenn is glenn@premiumcigars.org. If you have a specific question about federal or state or local, please reach out to one of us so that we can provide you additional information. There is that legislator lookup tool where you enter your address and it will find that information for you. And then, timing and key techniques. So one of the things, a little bit of behind the scenes, as we mentioned, Glenn and I are tracking legislation and ensuring that, when something comes up, that we are contacting elected officials at the appropriate time. So we may send you an email and you're like, why did PCA send me an email at Friday night? Well, that's because it's the most relevant. There might be a hearing on a Saturday morning. There might be something that just pops up. The legislative process is both fast and slow. Things will happen and it will be drawn out, and we're working to delay some of the legislative enactments in certain cases. But all of a sudden, something pops up that, they sneak into an omnibus bill where we have to be on the ready. There was something that involved a federal tobacco policy that recently popped up in legislation on the omnibus bill that we had to look through and make sure that it didn't involve premium cigars. And it actually is something positive where Congress is asking for more oversight and reporting by the Food and Drug Administration. So it's something that we discovered yesterday. We looked up and made sure that we had no concerns with it. And it's actually something that we support. We're hoping that gets passed in the final bill. So we're looking at specific timing, and we'll engage with you, the customers or the retailers, at that specific time. When something is not going on, and Glenn is in the thicket of the busy season from January to about April, where most state legislatures are in session. But after that, we will work on resource building, doing more of trainings, building our state associations, which we have been doing all of last year and into this year, and building that grassroots army and recruitment. Recruitment can never stop because, as I mentioned before, this is an adversarial environment where the anti-groups are also building their grassroots, and we need to remain and sustain competitiveness there. We are looking to build quality grassroots and not just quantity. So that is also important. If we can educate and provide trainings like this to 10,000 customers, and they're able to do a convincing congressional meeting or a state level meeting, that can be just as effective as 100,000 form letters that the anti-tobacco groups send through when they're misleading people and having them sign up for a walk for research of some type of health issue. So quality really matters, and that grass tops and influencers within the community. So, additional training and information, we provide our monthly Facebook Lives, kind of the general updates. So, every month PCA will be giving you kind of the download on what's going on at both the federal and state levels. That's why, folks hear from Glenn and I so frequently. We will be doing more webinars like this. For instance, next week, we're going to do one specifically for retailers and employees. As part of Vision 50, we are doing in-person visits and store visits. We're happy to conduct official meetings there. If you're interested over the month of July and August to have Glenn and I present to your cigar club or come and visit your employees or do a briefing, we are happy to do that and engage with you if you are a retailer. We're also creating one-pagers and policy guides to provide, as I mentioned before, the frequently asked questions or resources that we're getting a lot of questions about. And also, as always, you have on-demand access to our staff contacts, and resources. Glenn, I don't know if you have anything to add there on the training and information.
More of a background piece, and I just want to make sure this message gets through loud and clear in a political context. Premium handmade cigars and pipe tobacco are not partisan issues. And I know I'm getting into the weeds on this, but this is how you blend policy with advocacy, with grassroots engagement with your legislators, is remember that that our passion for great cigars is not partisan. I can take you from one capital to the next, and I'll find you a collection of Democrats that agree with a collection of Republicans on our issues. So I don't want people to pigeonhole things into that we're involved with in a partisan political context. I just think that's important to keep in mind. And the last piece of the puzzle that I just want to reinforce is that all politics are local. And the mechanisms on the screen there, the strategies that we've outlined in this discussion, allow us to substantiate that all politics are local. You know, there's the old story about Tip O'Neill knocking on doors after he'd been in Congress for 30 years. And he knocked on a door and he said to the lady, "I hope you vote for me." And she said, "I will this time." And he says, "What do you mean? We've known each other ever since I first got elected to Congress." And she said, "Yeah, but this is the first time you've ever asked." And we've got to remember that as we are engaged in this as never before. We have to ask. We have to make the calls. We have to send the emails. We have to reach out to our legislators, or we're going to be threatened as never before. What happens this week in terms of issuance of a major national report on the premium cigar regulatory environment is a case in point. We may have to launch a grassroots engagement in the not too distant future to fight a new onslaught of federal regulations. We don't know. We don't know from one day to the next where the threat may come from. It may be from a piece of legislation at a state capitol that becomes a model for a dozen other states, good, bad, or indifferent. That means we have to be ready. The machine, I've said this many, many times. The beautiful thing about the evolution of the cigar political environment is that our machine is never off now. Now that PCA is based in Washington, D.C., now that we've got the ability to pay attention to what's happening in our state capitals and city halls and halls of Congress, the machine will never be off. And that's Josh and I's pledge to the cigar community. So all we ask in return is that you respond to these calls for engagement. Send those emails, make those phone calls, post on social media, replicate our messages so that we can all work much, much more closely together to protect this great industry.
Absolutely. And to that point, Glenn, it takes us on our team hours to prepare for grassroots alerts. So when they're on the website, there's a lot of activity that goes into it, drafting a petition, drafting a letter, coming up with the targets. And it's always, disenchanting when we see the back end analytics of what's being set, to have only 3 or 4, people in a given state write about, protecting, premium cigars, or fighting against a tax increase, or supporting a tax cap. So, if you are one of those 3 or 4 retailers that are taking action in some of our states, please share it with your customers or your employees. We are glad that you're doing it, but we really need to garner up more support in certain states. And, other states, for instance, we had an alert in Illinois recently. Illinois did an incredible job. We had hundreds, if not over 1,000 people, take action in a matter of days. So it's one of those things where we want to increase participation across the board. That's why we're doing things, meant for consumers. On our social media, we just posted the new Grassroots 101 resource, which there's the link on screen there. Folks can go there and please, all of this information, whether it's this webinar recording or the policy resource on Grassroots 101, share it, within your email list. This is not something that PCA, necessarily needs credit for. If you want to use it, if you want to take this and print it out and distribute it at your shops, or share it amongst your cigar clubs, that is perfectly reasonable to do. We encourage it. We want to get more visibility for these activities, and it's a necessity that we do so. Glenn, I want to close real quick with you. I know that you mentioned, the NASEM report tomorrow. That will be released around 11 o'clock. We will be monitoring that as folks that have closely followed PCA's activities. We presented to the National Academies of Sciences. They are releasing a report on the health effects of and usage of premium cigars. PCA is also participating in the rulemaking process on flavored cigars. Again, we are going to be meeting with the Office of Management Budget and OIRA regarding the flavor ban, and looking at the scope of that, looking at what it means for characterizing flavors, looking at what it means for the context of premium cigars, and also defending the brick and mortar shops that sell non-premium flavored cigars. That we are very closely asserting the definition of premium cigars, which has not changed. That is our position. That Judge Maida and his definition, that is what premium cigars are. That's been endorsed by PCA and CRA. But we are actively fighting against prohibitions of products that we know are sold by our membership. So that position is very clear, and you'll find that on our policy resources section. Any closing thoughts or final thoughts, Glenn?
Sign up for cigaraction.org, become an advocate, spread the message far and wide. I enjoyed seeing on Facebook not too long ago, there was an issue in a given state. And on this page, everybody was posting a great picture of the cigar they were smoking. And someone said, fill out a petition to your legislator to protect your ability to do this before you post one more picture of yourself smoking a cigar. And I thought that message resonated. And one, I was really glad it didn't come from us. It was a consumer saying this. Quit posting pictures of enjoying a cigar until you have filled out this petition to protect your ability to do so. And that message is resonating. And I think if federal regulation and the threat of federal regulation has done anything, it has galvanized our community to recognize that it is under threat every single day. We're not the wine industry. We're not the spirits industry. We have to take that extra step to protect this passion that we share, and this great industry that makes it those moments possible. So I hope everybody takes the tools that have been outlined in this session, puts them to work, puts them to use, and do so at every level of government, every city hall, every state capitol, your members of Congress in the United States Senate, making sure that they know who you are as a recognized patron of great premium cigars and pipe tobacco.
Thank you all for your time and attention and for joining us today. As always, if you have any questions or comments or need additional resources, please reach out to our government affairs team. We really look forward to engaging with you as we continue the Vision 50 listening session and education session that we will be providing over the next few months. We'll be back next week, as I mentioned, for a training for retailers and employees specifically. And then, shortly after, we'll also be talking about some Vision 50 survey results in a closed session with our membership. So there are going to be a lot of new things on the horizon within PCA and PCA government affairs as we undergo this Vision 50 process. Thank you all again. Have a great afternoon.